It was just past 9 a.m. when Judge Malik Hayes pulled into a quiet gas station outside Davenport, Ohio. 10 minutes later, he was handcuffed, profiled, and illegally searched. What the officers didn't know? He was one of the most powerful legal minds in the state. What happened next sparked reform across an entire justice system. Watch this unbelievable true story. Like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that expose and inspire. It was just past 9 a.m. when Justice Malik Hayes, a 59-year-old black appellate court judge, pulled into the Marathon gas station just outside Davenport, Ohio. The sun had barely lifted above the cornfields, casting long golden streaks across the two-lane road that curved behind the service stop. There was nothing remarkable about the morning. Until there was. Malik had been driving since dawn, heading eastbound toward Columbus, where he was scheduled to speak at a judicial ethics conference at noon. The subject of his panel? Community trust and law enforcement accountability. The irony wouldn't hit until much later. He drove a sleek black BMW 7 Series. Low hum, spotless interior, precise German engineering. It wasn't flashy, but it was confident. Like Malik himself. He parked near Pump 4, stepped out in a navy-tailored suit, and straightened the soft indigo tie around his collar. His white shirt was crisp, pressed that morning before he left his home in Dayton. The only thing on his mind was a cup of coffee and a stretch before the final hour of the drive. Inside the small gas station shop, he paid for a coffee, black, no sugar, and a banana. The cashier, a teenage girl with dyed red hair and earbuds in one ear, barely looked up. Malik offered her a kind nod anyway. He didn't expect recognition. That wasn't why he moved the way he did. He was raised to carry dignity like a second skin. Not for attention, but for survival. He stepped back out into the morning light, the breeze catching the hem of his jacket. As he placed his coffee in the cup holder and settled into the driver's seat, he paused. A glint in the rearview mirror. Blue and red lights. The hollow swirl of a siren just coming to a halt. A state trooper cruiser eased into the parking lot behind him, blocking his rear exit. Malik's brow furrowed. Not in fear, but in calculation. What is this about? He stayed seated, engine still running, hands placed calmly on the steering wheel, every movement deliberate, every gesture visible. The cruiser door swung open. Out stepped Officer Brad Kellum, mid-40s, white, stocky build with a heavy belt and mirrored sunglasses that concealed his eyes, but not his attitude. His gait was already tense, his right hand hovering a little too close to the holster on his hip. He approached without hesitation. No smile, no neutral nod, just a wall of assumption in a uniform. Malik rolled the window down halfway and offered a professional, measured greeting. "Good morning, officer. Is everything all right?" No answer. Kellum's eyes moved across the car, then across Malik's face and suit. Suspicion? Disbelief? Contempt, maybe? Malik had seen it before. This wasn't new. What was new was how quickly it escalated. "We got a call," Kellum said flatly. "Suspicious vehicle leaving a Shell station 5 miles north. Matches this make and model. Dark sedan, out-of-state plates." Malik blinked, slowly. He didn't bristle. He didn't flinch. "I just left the station store. I'm headed to Columbus for a judicial conference. If it helps, I can show you my registration and ID." But Officer Kellum wasn't looking for help. He wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for confirmation of a story already written in his mind. "Step out of the vehicle," Kellum said, louder this time. No pleas, no clarification. It wasn't a question. Malik hesitated only for a breath. Then he turned the key and powered off the car. Slowly, methodically, he opened the door, and stepped out. At 6'2", he carried himself like a man who belonged anywhere, including here. And yet, here, on this gravel lot beside Pump 4, that posture only seemed to aggravate the trooper. "You mind explaining what you're doing here?" Kellum asked, now walking in a tight arc around Malik like a lion sizing up prey. "I just told you," Malik said, his tone still even. "I'm en route to a legal ethics conference. I stopped for gas, that's all." Kellum didn't answer. He circled the car once, then returned to Malik. "Pop the trunk." Malik raised his eyebrows slightly. "Officer, I don't consent to a search. You don't have probable cause, and I haven't been accused of a crime." And just like that, the air snapped. Kellum's hand went to his belt. Not for the gun, not yet, but the radio. He muttered something unintelligible into it, code words and half-sentences. His face was tight now, jaw clenched. Malik could see it. This man wasn't just suspicious. He was challenged, and something in his posture screamed that he didn't like it. From across the lot, a pickup truck pulled in. A man in flannel got out and glanced at the scene but kept moving. Just a black man and a cop. Seen that movie before. Nothing to do but pump gas and move on. Except one person didn't move on. Near the ice chest and vending machines stood a young woman, college-aged, backpack over one shoulder, holding a smartphone just low enough to look discreet. She had seen something in the officer's body language that unsettled her. Back by the cruiser, Kellum had taken a step forward, voice rising. "I said pop the trunk or I'll detain you for obstruction." Malik's voice never wavered. "I know the law, officer. I won't resist, but I won't consent to a search without a warrant. You're making a mistake." Kellum's face turned a shade redder. "You people always think you're above the law. That was it. Not you drivers, not you suspects. You people." And with that slip, everything became clear. Malik barely had time to respond before Kellum grabbed his wrist, spun him around with unnecessary force, and yanked his other arm behind his back. "You are now under investigative detention," Kellum barked. The metal cuffs clamped shut. Malik winced, but only slightly. No yelling, no resistance, just that quiet, infuriating calm. The college girl's phone was up now, clearly recording. The flannel-shirted man stood frozen, pump still in his hand, eyes wide. Kellum didn't notice, didn't care. His mind was locked in a fantasy of control, dominance, and vindication. He marched Malik to the cruiser like a trophy. Inside the back seat, Malik sat straight. He didn't hang his head. He didn't speak. His eyes drifted to the side window, watching the wind blow through the cornstalks across the highway. There was no rage on his face, just a heavy stillness. The kind that came from seeing this story play out far too often. From the bench, from the news, from his own family's memories. Now it was his turn. But what Officer Kellum didn't know, what he couldn't begin to imagine, was that this wouldn't end with a booking form and a shrug. This time, the story was different. Because this man wasn't just another roadside arrest. He was a sitting appellate judge. And the next chapter? It would turn the spotlight not just on him, but on the entire system. And it had already begun. The sun had climbed higher now, casting a sharp glare across the cruiser's windshield, as Justice Malik Hayes sat in the back seat, his wrists cuffed tightly behind him. The soft click of the door closing behind him echoed louder than it should have. There was no arrest declaration, no rights read, just steel cuffs, a flex of authority, and a silence that swallowed the truth. Malik said nothing. His face remained composed, his breath even, his posture undisturbed, but inside, 1,000 calculations were already turning. Outside, Officer Brad Kellum circled the vehicle like a man who had something to prove and nothing to lose. His jaw was set, his steps sharp. He didn't radio dispatch for an official warrant. He didn't even bother pretending anymore. Malik's ID had been left untouched on the passenger seat. The man had offered it willingly. State-issued, judicial seal, bar credentials, all neatly tucked inside a black leather wallet. But Kellum hadn't looked once. Because this wasn't about identity. It was about control. Then came the second cruiser. It pulled in from the north end of the station lot, gravel crackling under its tires. The second officer, Dana Lutz, stepped out with the stiff movements of someone still new to the job. She was in her late 20s, hair pulled into a short ponytail, her badge polished, her steps precise. She approached with caution, not out of fear, but uncertainty. She hadn't expected backup to mean this. Kellum met her halfway between their cruisers. "Guy was parked here, engine running," he said in a clipped voice. "Refused to open the trunk. Said he's got somewhere to be. I cuffed him for obstruction. Could be linked to a stolen vehicle from the Shell north of here." Lutz glanced at the BMW. "Did he resist?" "Nope, but he's got that smug thing. You know the type." Kellum didn't even lower his voice. Lutz gave a half nod, unsure. "You run his ID?" "Working on it," Kellum lied, already walking back to the black sedan. Malik turned slightly in the back seat, watching through the window. His wrists ached now. Cuffs were always tighter than they needed to be. But the pain didn't matter. What mattered was that Kellum was about to break the law. Again. Kellum opened the driver's side door and reached into the glove box. No warrant, no verbal consent, no supervisor's approval. Just an open search, conducted under the assumption that no one would stop him. Except someone had noticed. Across the lot, Jenna Alvarez, the college student from the vending machines, had not moved. She was still holding her phone low, now filming in earnest. She hadn't meant to get involved. It had started as curiosity, maybe concern. But the moment she saw Kellum throw the cuffs on the man in the suit, something shifted. She wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't even studying law. But she knew injustice when she saw it. Her phone's camera captured everything. The calm refusal, the unnecessary force, the illegal search. The entire sequence was unfolding with clinical violence. No yelling, no struggle, just the quiet crushing of rights under the weight of a badge. Meanwhile, Lutz stood stiffly near the cruiser, her eyes darting between her partner and the man in the back seat. Something didn't sit right. The man hadn't shouted, hadn't cursed. He hadn't even raised his voice. He had offered credentials. He had spoken with precision and calm. And still, he was cuffed in the back of a car, his belongings being rifled through like he was some kind of threat. Her training echoed in her mind. De-escalation is the priority. Detain only when necessary. Search with consent or legal authority. She had heard those words just months ago at the academy. And now? Now, none of it seemed to matter. "Kellum," she called quietly, walking closer. "Maybe we should run the ID first, just to be sure." "He's hiding something. Trust me. Guys like this?" Kellum snapped his fingers. "They always think they're above the law." Lutz didn't respond. She looked at Malik, still calm, still watching. Not defiant, not scared, just present. It unnerved her more than if he had been yelling. From her vantage point, Jenna zoomed in. Her hand shook slightly, but she steadied it. She had already started live streaming to her private group chat. Within minutes, someone else had shared it. 2, then 5, then dozens. The caption read, "This man was just cuffed for doing nothing. Suit, ID, calm, and still treated like a criminal. This ain't right." Back at the cruiser, Kellum emerged from the BMW with Malik's ID in hand. He glanced at it for the first time. Saw the seal. The title. The name. Honorable Malik E. Hayes. Appellate Judge, State of Ohio. He blinked. Just once. But he didn't soften. Instead, he tossed the wallet onto the hood and muttered under his breath. You think just 'cause you wear a suit and got a title, you don't gotta answer questions? He growled, leaning toward the back seat. I don't care who you are. You're not special. Malik turned his head, meeting his gaze through the open window. Officer, he said, voice low but clear. I am not resisting, but I do advise you, with respect, to check my credentials and to call your supervisor, right now. Something about the tone, not angry, not pleading, just precise, made Kellum pause. Lutz took a small step forward. He's right, she said carefully. If he's a sitting judge. Kellum waved her off. You believe this crap? She didn't answer. Malik, meanwhile, had turned back to the window. He wasn't watching the officer anymore. He was watching the horizon, the cornfields that stretched past the gas station, the road, the sky. He could feel it. The shift. Not in the officers, not yet, but in the air. The bystander. The camera. The digital thread already snaking its way through group chats, social media feeds, text chains. The truth was moving faster than Kellum ever could. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about the conference in Columbus. He wasn't thinking about his aching wrists or his bruised pride. He was thinking about pattern recognition. The countless young men he'd seen come through his courtroom with similar stories, but no camera, no badge, no seat at the table. Now it was his turn. He didn't need to shout. He just needed to wait. Because everything Kellum had done, the cuffs, the threats, the illegal search, had been captured. And what he didn't understand was that this wasn't the end of a routine stop. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The ride to the Davenport County Sheriff's Station was short, just under 10 miles. But for Justice Malik Hayes, every second of that ride felt like an unraveling. The cruiser hummed quietly along the back roads, trees blurring into the windows like smudged paint. But Malik wasn't looking at the scenery. He was focused inward, cataloging the officer's movements, remembering every word exchanged, every illegal step taken. His wrists ached in the cuffs, the cold bite of metal reminding him with each turn of the wheel that dignity, even earned over decades, could be stripped away in less than 10 minutes. When they pulled into the station's side lot, the cruiser slid to a stop beside a row of unmarked police vehicles. The concrete outside the back entrance was cracked and stained, and as Malik was led from the car, his shoes made a soft, deliberate sound. Polished leather tapping against neglect. He moved without resistance, his head high, posture upright. Even cuffed, he held himself like a man who belonged at a bench, not behind bars. But inside, none of that mattered. The front desk buzzed with the usual morning rhythm. Phones ringing, officers chatting, keyboards clacking. Fluorescent lights cast a sickly pall over the beige walls, and a stale scent of burnt coffee lingered in the air. Deputy Carl Tinsley, a thick-shouldered man with a graying mustache, barely looked up from his paperwork when Kellum escorted Malik inside. Obstruction and vehicle match, Kellum grunted, shoving a clipboard toward the deputy. Refused a trunk search, wouldn't give a straight answer. Malik opened his mouth, but Tinsley cut him off with a lazy wave. Just get him booked. If he's clean, we'll cut him loose. Malik's ID, his judicial credentials, was still with Kellum. The officer placed it on the booking desk without comment. Tinsley picked it up and glanced at it for all of 3 seconds. Didn't scan it. Didn't type it in. Didn't notice the gold seal embossed in the corner. He dropped it back down like it was a library card. Full name? He asked without looking up. Malik blinked. It's on the card. Tinsley gave him a slow look. You want to play smart? That's fine. Just makes it take longer. Malik took a slow breath. Malik Emmanuel Hayes. Age? 59. Occupation? Malik hesitated. I'm a judge. Appellate Division. 14th Circuit. That made Tinsley pause, but only for a second. Then he chuckled and shook his head. Right. And I'm the mayor of Cincinnati. Behind the desk, one of the younger deputies laughed. Another muttered something under his breath. Thinks he's somebody. Malik didn't flinch. He had spent more than 20 years in courtrooms. He had sat through murder trials, corruption cases, class action suits, and civil rights battles. He had delivered rulings that shaped state law. But now, here, in this bland linoleum hallway, none of it mattered. He wasn't a judge. He was a suspect. A tall black man in a tailored suit with the nerve to assert his rights. To them, that wasn't confidence. It was defiance. Kellum leaned against the wall, arms crossed, satisfied. Officer Dana Lutz, his partner, hovered near the door, silent. She hadn't said a word since the drive over. Her eyes avoided Malik's. Avoided everyone's, really. She looked like someone who had just seen something break, but wasn't brave enough to name it. May I make a phone call now? Malik asked, his voice steady, measured. Tinsley didn't answer. He scribbled something on the intake form. I have a scheduled appearance in Columbus, Malik continued. It's imperative I notify my office. I'm not resisting or causing delay. I am simply requesting the right to make a call. Kellum snorted. Man, give it a rest. Malik turned toward him slowly. You are making a mistake that will not disappear quietly. For a moment, the station felt still. Something in his tone shifted the air, a warning wrapped in absolute control. But it was lost on the room. Tinsley handed a pair of latex gloves to a deputy. Frisk him. Inventory anything on him. We'll toss him in holding while we check the plates. I have a judicial appearance in 2 hours, Malik said again. You are holding me without charge, without warrant, and without access to counsel. That is a constitutional violation. You don't get to throw around big words here, Judge. Kellum spat the last word like it was a joke. Malik's mouth set in a firm line. He said nothing more. They walked him down a short hallway into a holding room. It was small, windowless, with gray cinder-block walls and a single hard plastic chair bolted to the floor. No clock, no mirror. Just isolation. The cuffs were finally removed, but the red marks on Malik's wrists had already formed. Sharp, swollen outlines of power misused. His suit was wrinkled now, his shirt untucked on one side. He sat in the chair and exhaled, slow and deep. Minutes passed. Then half an hour. Then a full hour. No one came in. No phone. No explanation. Just absence. From the hallway, muted voices drifted in. Laughter, a game on someone's phone, the thump of boots on tile. Malik remained still breathing, still upright. But his mind was anything but quiet. He was filing every detail, every phrase, every face. Another deputy came by and glanced into the room. Did a double-take. Malik didn't react. Who is that guy? The deputy asked someone just out of view. Claims he's a judge. Dressed like it. So what? Could be faking. The voices faded again. Somewhere in the far corner of the station, Malik's ID sat untouched. The judicial database, one that could have verified his identity in under 15 seconds, remained unopened. Nobody had bothered. Because why would they? To them, he didn't look like a judge. He looked like a story they'd seen before. And it didn't matter how many years he'd spent studying law or how many young attorneys he'd mentored. Here, none of it counted. Eventually, Malik leaned back slightly in the chair. His eyes moved to the ceiling. He wasn't angry. He wasn't panicked. He was waiting. Because he knew something none of them did. The world outside this building was already watching, and soon the truth would arrive, not through shouting or threats, but through undeniable, visible proof. It was nearly 11:15 when Captain Renee Barlow stepped through the double-glass doors of the Davenport County Sheriff's Station, a tablet in one hand and a steaming thermos of coffee in the other. The morning brief had gone long, and her inbox was stacked with personnel requests, procedural audits, and 3 citizen complaints from the previous week. She wasn't in the mood for distractions, least of all from some minor roadside stop-turned detainment that had been quietly logged under vehicle suspicion and non-compliance. On her way through the bullpen, she barely glanced at the officers milling near the break room until she heard a low snicker behind her. "Dude said he's a judge, like a real one. Full suit, attitude, and all." Barlow paused, slowly turned. Her boots echoed sharply across the tile floor as she stepped back into the open space. Officer Kellum was leaning against a filing cabinet, arms crossed, retelling his version of the morning to a couple of deputies like it was a hunting story. "Wouldn't let us search his trunk. Said we were violating his rights. Kept throwing words around like due process and judicial appearance. Real dramatic." Barlow narrowed her eyes. "Kellum." He looked up, surprised. "Cap, what's this I hear about a judge?" Kellum smirked. "Just some guy trying to act important. Black BMW, fancy suit. Claimed he was heading to a legal thing in Columbus. Wouldn't cooperate." Barlow frowned. "You get his name?" Kellum shrugged. "Malik Hayes or something. Said he was a circuit judge." "And you verified that?" He hesitated. "I mean, he had an ID. Could have been fake." Barlow didn't reply. She walked past him, coffee forgotten, and headed straight for the intake desk. "Tinsley," she snapped, "give me the name and license from this morning's 10:05 detainment. Now." Tinsley, startled, pulled up the entry and flipped the screen toward her. "Here. Malik E. Hayes, age 59. Claimed he's an appellate judge." Barlow's fingers flew across the terminal keyboard. She opened the state judicial database, something she hadn't done since the last time a state rep's kid got caught with contraband. She entered the name. The search took 2 seconds. The result took the breath from the room. Honorable Malik Emanuel Hayes, appellate judge, 14th District. 22 years on the bench. Former state bar ethics chair. Frequent speaker on constitutional law. Featured guest at the very ethics conference being held today in Columbus. Barlow's eyes widened. She clicked the photo. There he was, in a navy robe, seated behind a polished bench. Same jawline. Same calm eyes. The same man currently sitting in her holding cell, probably wondering how far down the system had to rot before someone noticed. She stood quickly, tablet in hand, and strode back into the bullpen. "Where is he?" Kellum raised an eyebrow. "In holding. Room B." Barlow didn't speak, didn't slow. Her boots hit the hallway tile like punctuation. She passed Lutz, who looked like she'd swallowed a rock. The younger officer tried to say something, but Barlow had already reached the door. Inside, Malik Hayes sat exactly as she expected he would. Upright, composed, hands folded neatly in his lap. His cuffs were off, but the red marks on his wrists remained. When he looked up, his expression didn't change. He didn't leap up, didn't accuse, didn't posture. He simply met her eyes like a man who'd been waiting for this moment. Barlow took a breath. "Sir, I'm Captain Renee Barlow. I've just reviewed your credentials." A pause. Malik nodded once. "Then I suspect you understand the gravity of what's happened here." She did. God, she did. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly. "I do. And let me begin by offering my personal and professional apology." Behind her, Kellum stepped into the hallway. "Wait, Your Honor?" Barlow turned slowly. You detained and handcuffed a sitting appellate judge without probable cause. You ignored his identification, conducted an unauthorized search, and denied him his right to contact counsel. Do you realize what that means? Kellam's smug confidence cracked. He didn't act like a judge. He was vague. He refused to comply. Barlow's voice dropped, sharp and surgical. He knew the law better than you. That's not vague. That's disciplined. You ignored due process. You failed basic protocol. And now your actions are under scrutiny from every direction. Kellam opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Officer Lutz lingered behind him, face pale. Barlow turned back to Malik. I've already contacted the regional commander. We're preparing a statement for your office. But I'd like to know how you'd prefer to proceed. Malik stood, slow and deliberate. He smoothed his suit jacket, then picked up the black leather wallet still sitting on the edge of the plastic chair. I'd like to contact my office in Columbus, he said calmly. I have a scheduled appearance in less than an hour. Barlow nodded. We'll get you there. I'll assign a driver. Kellam sputtered. You're giving him a... Barlow spun. Not another word, officer. You're done here for now. The room fell silent. Malik walked past Kellam without a glance, as though the man had already become irrelevant. A footnote in a much larger record. Barlow walked beside him, her posture rigid, eyes forward. Back in the front office, a few deputies looked up as they passed. One blinked in recognition, another stepped quietly out of their way. The story was spreading fast. A few had already seen the video, posted by the college girl across the lot, the one who had streamed it live. By the time Malik exited the building, the wheels of accountability were already turning. Internal Affairs had been notified. The State Attorney General's office had issued a request for a full report. And social media? It was on fire. But Malik said nothing about any of it. He simply stepped into the department vehicle that had been quietly summoned for him, nodded once to Captain Barlow, and pulled out his phone. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Because he knew something deeper had shifted. Not just in this station. Not just in Kellam's record. But in the storyline itself. And soon, the rest of the state, and the country, would know it too. This wasn't over. Not even close. By the time Justice Malik Hayes was en route to Columbus in the unmarked department vehicle, courtesy of Captain Rene Barlow, the internet was already on fire. What began as a 27-second video, shaky and recorded on instinct by Jenna Alvarez, the college student from the gas station, had transformed into a digital lightning bolt. She had uploaded it moments after leaving the scene, her hands still trembling from what she'd witnessed. She captioned it plainly, honestly, and without filter. Judge cuffed at pump for being black. The video started mid-interaction. Officer Kellam's voice, sharp and loud, commanding Malik to step out of the vehicle. The camera shook slightly as Jenna crouched behind a vending machine. What it captured next was undeniable. Malik's composed face as he calmly asked, "What's the charge, officer?" Followed by the immediate, violent response. His arms pulled behind his back, his body twisted with force, metal cuffs slapping around his wrists. But it wasn't just the brutality that struck people. It was the contrast, the stillness of Malik's face, the restraint in his voice, the sheer absence of anything threatening or aggressive. There was no yelling, no flinching, just a man in a tailored suit, being manhandled like a criminal for daring to exist at a gas station in a nice car. The silence in the clip was louder than any protest. Jenna's whispered words in the background sealed it. "This is insane. He didn't do anything." Within 30 minutes, the video had been reposted to Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. A freelance journalist in Columbus retweeted it, tagging it with, "Sadati, Justice for Judge Hayes. Jew cuffed for being black. Not above the law, but still not below it." By noon, Justice Malik was stepping into the state conference building, and adjusting his tie for a scheduled panel on judicial integrity, his name had already gone viral. Across the country, thousands watched the clip on loop. Students, attorneys, activists, parents, and judges themselves. Civil rights groups picked it up first. The Urban Justice Alliance, the National Legal Equity Fund, Black Defenders United. Their statements came swiftly, words sharpened with outrage and disbelief. This is a sobering reminder that no title, no suit, no record of honor can protect a black man from the shadow of assumption. When a judge gets cuffed without cause, the Constitution has failed him, and us. The National Bar Association issued a public letter demanding the immediate suspension of the officers involved and a full investigation. Their spokesperson, a former federal prosecutor, didn't hold back during an interview with MSNBC. "If this can happen to Justice Hayes," she said, eyes narrowed, "imagine what's happening to the young men without cameras, without titles, and without someone to speak for them." Local networks were quick to follow. WTCL Columbus ran the headline, "Viral Arrest, State Judge Handcuffed Without Cause at Rural Gas Station." Before the hour was over, national media joined the fray. CNN breaking, appellate judge detained in Ohio, racial profiling alleged. Washington Post online, justice denied? Viral video shows black judge arrested without cause. NBC Nightly News, dignity in cuffs. When the system ignores its own. Screenshots from the video flooded timelines. Malik's stoic expression framed by handcuffs, the reflection of the cruiser's lights in his polished glasses, Kellum's hand gripping his elbow like a trophy, and beside it, official state photos of Malik in his robe, seated at the bench, presiding over cases that defined legal precedent in Ohio. The contradiction was so jarring it felt staged, but it wasn't. And that's what made it devastating. By mid-afternoon, Malik's office in Dayton was fielding hundreds of calls from reporters, legal scholars, and concerned citizens. His assistant, who had no idea what had happened until the clip surfaced, watched the video on loop, tears forming in her eyes. "He never even raised his voice," she whispered. At the Davenport County Sheriff's Station, the atmosphere had shifted into a low, uneasy silence. The video had made it to every terminal. Even the most hardened officers watched it with clenched jaws and darting glances. Captain Barlow moved through the building with tight shoulders and a phone pressed constantly to her ear. First with the regional commander, then internal affairs, then the Ohio Attorney General's office. Kellum sat in the briefing room alone, his earlier bravado now hollow. His name was trending, but not in triumph. Lutz, his silent partner, had barely spoken since the truth came down in the captain's voice like a gavel. Outside, local protesters had already begun to gather. First a dozen, then dozens more. They brought signs. "Dignity is not probable cause. Judged before justice. Would you cuff a white judge?" The front steps of the station became a gathering point. A local preacher led a quiet prayer. A mother stood with her teenage son, gripping his hand tighter than usual. No shouting, no sirens, just quiet fury, focused, unwavering. Meanwhile, inside the state capitol, just as the governor's ethics roundtable began, all eyes turned to the room's double doors. At exactly 2 o'clock, Justice Malik Hayes stepped into the marble rotunda. He wore the same navy suit, same quiet dignity. But now, he carried something heavier than legal notes or policy papers. He carried the eyes of a nation on his shoulders. The reporters fell silent. The aides stood. Even the governor rose to greet him, not out of formality, but out of something closer to reverence. He extended a hand. "Justice Hayes," he said, "we're honored to have you here." Malik shook his hand and gave a polite nod. "Thank you, Governor. I believe the timing speaks for itself." What happened next was not on the original agenda. Malik asked to speak. The governor allowed it. He stood at the center of the chamber, facing a room full of lawmakers, judges, media, and citizens. And with the same calm that never left him, even in cuffs, he began. Yesterday morning, I was handcuffed without cause, detained without reason, and denied my rights. Not because of what I did, but because of what I look like. The video speaks for itself. But let me be clear. This isn't just about me. I'm not the first, and unless we act, I won't be the last. There was no yelling, no anger, just truth. And it hit harder than any protest chant ever could. Outside, on every phone screen and television, the story played on repeat. And across America, people weren't just watching. They were remembering. Because when even a judge can be profiled, cuffed, and dismissed without cause, then no one is truly safe. But when that judge stands up, not in rage, but in clarity, and makes the system answer for itself, then change doesn't just become possible. It becomes inevitable. The sun had barely risen the next morning when the rotunda of the Ohio State Capitol filled with an electricity that couldn't be named but couldn't be ignored. The echoes of the viral video, the firestorm of media coverage, and the quiet dignity of Justice Malik Hayes had reshaped not just the headlines, but the entire tone of government proceedings. What had once been planned as a sterile, scripted summit on judicial ethics had exploded into something urgent, raw, and unignorable. No one had expected what came next. At 8 o'clock sharp, Governor David Renner convened a closed-door emergency meeting with state legal counsel, high-ranking judiciary members, and the Ohio Commission on Police Oversight. The agenda was rewritten in real time. The proposal came swiftly. A public review hearing, today, focused solely on the actions of officers Brad Kellum and Dana Lutz. The charges: unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and racially biased policing. There was only one person who could chair it. When the governor turned to Malik Hayes and asked if he would lead the review panel, the room held its breath. Malik paused, not out of fear, but out of weight. This was not about retaliation. It couldn't be. He had always believed that justice must be impartial, even when personal. But this wasn't personal. This was systemic. He saw it in the eyes of the young men who filled his courtroom year after year. He heard it in the muffled sobs of mothers in the gallery. He read it in the hollow excuses printed in incident reports. And now, the country had seen it happen to him. "Yes," he said at last, "but I won't be the only voice. I want a full panel, diverse, independent, and open to the public." The governor agreed. Within 2 hours, Room 104, normally reserved for legislative briefings, had been transformed. A long, elevated bench lined with 3 judges, including Malik, faced rows of gallery seats, cameras, and a few reporters granted early access. A state-appointed legal analyst, a civil rights attorney, and 2 citizens selected from the oversight board flanked the panel. A flag hung behind them, but it was the silence in the room that made the walls feel tight. At 10 a.m. exactly, the session began. Officers Kellum and Lutz were escorted in, not in handcuffs, but in uniform, though the pride in their posture had noticeably deflated. Kellum's face was pale, jaw tight. Lutz looked down, clutching a folder she never opened. Malik's gavel struck once. The room froze. He leaned forward slightly, voice calm but unshakable. "Before we begin the review of evidence," he said, "I want to make one thing clear." His eyes swept the room, not just looking at the officers, but through the lens of every camera now streaming live to thousands across the country. Justice must apply even in silence, even in a parking lot. It cannot hinge on who someone is. It must hinge on what is right and what is lawful. The silence that followed didn't beg for applause. It simply sat there, heavy, undeniable. The review commenced. Body cam footage from Kellum's chest rig was played first. It showed everything, from the moment he pulled into the gas station to the aggressive tone in his voice to the forced cuffing despite no visible threat. Even his commentary as he walked Malik to the cruiser, muttering, "These people always got a story," hit like a slap across the room. Next came Lutz's footage. Hers was shorter, but damning in a different way. It captured her silence, her inaction, her uneasy glances as the search occurred without warrant. When asked by the panel why she didn't intervene or speak up, her voice cracked slightly. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to challenge my partner." Malik didn't scold her. He didn't have to. The footage did the work. Then came the internal incident reports, both handwritten and digital. Kellum's version of events described non-compliance, belligerent attitude, and verbal resistance. None of it aligned with the body cam footage or the video taken by Jenna Alvarez, which had now reached over 3 million views and had been shared by senators, athletes, and civil rights leaders alike. The panel questioned both officers. Kellum defended himself with clipped responses. "I was following protocol. He refused a lawful order." Malik responded, voice calm but surgical. "Refusing an unlawful search is not obstruction, officer. That is a constitutional right, one you are sworn to protect, not punish." Lutz admitted that she had never verified Malik's ID. "I assumed it wasn't real." Malik didn't raise his voice. "You made that assumption based on what?" She didn't answer. The legal analyst read from the department's own policy manual. The civil rights attorney outlined federal case law on stop and frisk and warrantless searches. The citizen board members took notes, visibly stunned. The session lasted over 2 hours. Outside the hearing chamber, protesters lined the Capitol steps in silence. Many held small, printed stills from the original video. Not signs, just screenshots, just truth. Inside, the panel recessed for deliberation. When they returned, Malik's gavel struck again. "We, the panel, have reached a unanimous conclusion," he announced. "The conduct of Officers Brad Kellum and Dana Lutz constituted a violation of constitutional rights, departmental policy, and the ethical standard of law enforcement." His voice did not tremble. It rang. Their actions were rooted not in duty, but in assumption. Not in law, but in bias. The recommendation: immediate suspension without pay, pending further investigation by the State Attorney General's office. Additionally, a review of every traffic stop made by Kellum and Lutz over the past 3 years would begin immediately. Kellum didn't look up. Lutz's eyes welled, but she didn't protest. And Malik? He didn't celebrate. He simply closed the session with one final line: "Justice cannot exist when fear governs action more than facts." Today, we chose to face that fear with clarity. He stood, straightened his coat, and walked out, head high, heart steady. In that moment, he was no longer the man in the viral video, no longer the victim. He was the authority, and the system for once had listened. The moment the hearing adjourned, the room emptied in tense, stunned silence. There were no cheers, no chants, just the collective exhale of a system realizing it had been caught on its own security camera. The image of Justice Malik Hayes standing at the center of the panel, robes replaced by a fitted navy suit and calm authority, remained seared into the memory of every person in attendance. Officers Brad Kellum and Dana Lutz didn't leave with their badges, just a stack of official notices, a suspension order, and the weight of a country now watching their every move. The ruling wasn't just a disciplinary decision, it was a fault line, a rupture in the quiet complicity that had protected countless acts of misconduct under the shroud of procedure and plausible deniability. For years, the state had absorbed complaints, shrugged off filed grievances, and trusted internal reports written by the same hands that had committed the offenses. But this time, the lie couldn't hold. Not when the victim was a judge. Not when the evidence was viral. Not when the silence had a camera. By the following morning, Malik's office had submitted a formal memorandum to the Office of the State Attorney General, recommending a full audit of every stop, citation, and arrest logged by Kellum and Lutz over the past 3 years. The order didn't just stop at traffic infractions, it extended to detainments, field interrogations, and every complaint, formal or otherwise, filed against them. The findings came quickly, and they were damning. Over 100 stops had been documented where no citation was ever issued, no crime was charged, and no report was properly completed. Just roadside detainments, mostly involving young Black and Latino men, pulled from their vehicles under the guise of routine suspicion. Body cam footage was often absent. Dash cam logs showed unusual gaps. Some patrol logs listed stop locations that didn't exist or times that overlapped with other patrol units. And the statements? A pattern of vague language, recycled phrases, and questionable handwriting. One stop in particular stood out. A 19-year-old student, detained in broad daylight for nervous behavior, was never charged. His complaint had been dismissed. No video. No record beyond a single incident card that read, "Subject matched description. Released." There were dozens like it. As these reports surfaced, the media storm reignited. National outlets ran headlines that read like courtroom verdicts. Pattern of abuse uncovered in Ohio trooper records. From profiling to policy, what Judge Hayes sparked. Over 100 detentions now, under review following viral arrest. Civil rights attorneys began drafting class action suits. Activist groups like Justice Forward Ohio called for the immediate review of the entire Davenport County Enforcement Branch. But Malik wasn't interested in spectacle. He didn't make himself the face of the movement. Instead, he quietly worked behind the scenes, coordinating with legal oversight boards and policy committees. He provided detailed notes on case law, accountability standards, and judicial ethics. He helped craft the framework for what would become the statewide Bias Audit Initiative, a bipartisan legislative package designed to permanently embed racial profiling detection protocols into officer performance evaluations. Even officers across the state, many of whom had watched the original video in uncomfortable silence, began speaking out. Younger recruits whispered to their instructors, "That could have been me out there. I would have followed the same steps Kellum did, until I saw the footage." Veteran officers expressed concern, not out of guilt, but out of fear. Fear that the ground they'd stood on for so long was no longer solid. In internal training sessions, clips from Malik's detainment were now being shown as case studies, not just of wrongful arrest, but of restraint, of silence, of how bias hides behind policy, and how authority misapplied can shatter trust in seconds. By the end of the second week, Captain Renee Barlow, the mid-level administrator who had first verified Malik's identity, initiated a full procedural audit of her precinct. She personally reviewed every open complaint. She reached out to citizens who had previously been ignored. She suspended 2 additional officers, quietly but firmly, based on new evidence uncovered during the review of Kellum and Lutz's records. The culture inside the department was shifting. Slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Officers who once rolled their eyes at sensitivity training now took notes. Mandatory workshops on de-escalation, racial bias, and constitutional literacy were booked months in advance. What had once been treated as optional policy discussions were now written into departmental mandates. And yet, Malik never once used the incident for personal gain. He didn't appear on the morning shows. He turned down a primetime interview slot on national television. When asked why, he simply said, "This isn't about airtime. It's about airtight reform." He returned to the bench just 2 weeks after the review hearing, quietly resuming his caseload. But those who appeared before him now looked at him differently. Lawyers stood straighter. Defendants paid closer attention. Officers entering the courtroom kept their hands folded tight, and their tone measured. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. They understood that justice wasn't just a robe or a gavel. It was a standard. And Malik Hayes had become its clearest mirror. Outside his courtroom, a new sign had been discreetly installed by courthouse staff. It read, "Equal before the law, accountable beneath it." It wasn't a slogan. It was a warning and a promise. And as for Officers Kellum and Lutz, both remained suspended. Their records were now part of a wider investigation that would likely determine not just their future, but the futures of the citizens they had impacted. Attorneys representing multiple plaintiffs began requesting access to cases connected to their stops. Appeals were filed. Settlements discussed. Some charges had already been dropped. Others, those long forgotten by the public, were finally being re-examined under the cold, steady light of scrutiny. A reckoning had begun, not with rage, not with noise, but with the calm refusal of a man who knew the law too well to let it be misused. And somewhere across the country, someone watched the video again, only this time not to be shocked, but to remember. Because this time, the system didn't look away. It looked inward. And for the first time in a long time, it blinked. 3 weeks after the review hearing, and exactly 23 days after the video of Justice Malik Hayes being wrongfully cuffed exploded across every major platform in America, the governor of Ohio stepped to a walnut podium on the Capitol steps and faced a crowd that had grown beyond anything the administration expected. What began as a press conference quickly became something larger, an address not only to the state, but to the nation, flanked by law enforcement officials, legal scholars, civil rights leaders, and standing quietly to his left, Malik Hayes, the governor raised his voice above the murmuring press. "This is more than policy," he said. "It's a moral course correction. When justice falters in a parking lot, it falls in the courtroom too. Today, we announce the introduction of the Hayes Integrity Act." A hush swept the crowd. The name alone spoke volumes. The act proposed sweeping changes to state law enforcement standards, mandatory anti-bias training, real-time credential verification during roadside stops, and de-escalation protocols integrated directly into academy curricula. No longer would a badge alone justify a stop, and no longer would silence be accepted as a defense for racial profiling. Every officer in the state, from fresh cadet to decorated veteran, would be retrained under the new framework. Departments would be evaluated annually, and most importantly, the public would have access to data. Real numbers, real patterns, real accountability. The law had teeth. Reporters snapped photos as Malik remained still, expression calm, but eyes unwavering. He didn't smile for the cameras. He didn't raise a fist. His presence was enough. The story had always been more than about him. Now the law would reflect that. The bill sailed through committee faster than anyone predicted. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, under pressure from constituents and the power of undeniable footage, understood the cost of resistance. Within 12 days, the Hayes Integrity Act passed with bipartisan support, 62 votes to 11 in the House, and a near-unanimous sweep in the Senate. And then came the real work. Police academies across Ohio restructured their training programs overnight. Departments hired civil rights consultants. New modules appeared in coursework, identifying implicit bias in field interaction, constitutional limits on officer discretion, de-escalation under pressure. Recruits were taught not just the mechanics of the job, but its moral weight. The days of command first, explain later were over. And Malik? He stayed off the podium. No interviews, no memoir deals. But when the Ohio State Law Enforcement Training Academy invited him to speak at the first cadet session trained under the new law, he said yes. It was a gray morning, early, with fog still clinging to the grass. The academy's drill yard was quiet, rows of cadets standing at attention, their uniforms crisp, their nerves hidden under pressed collars. They had heard about him, of course. Some had watched the video in class. Others had read his legal opinions in constitutional law modules. But this was different. Now he stood before them. No bodyguards, no theatrics, just a man in a dark charcoal suit, shoes polished but practical, holding a slim leather folder under one arm. He stepped up to the podium placed beneath the state flag and adjusted the mic with the same care he might take with a courtroom gavel. The wind tugged lightly at the corner of his jacket. He waited for the silence to settle. "I'm not here to talk about what happened to me," he began. "You already know that story." He looked out across the formation, men and women, all ages, all races, the next generation of law enforcement. "I'm here to talk about what comes next. Because the badge you wear, some will fear it, some will hate it, but many will trust it. That trust is not automatic. It is not given. Authority must be earned every time it is used." A few cadets shifted slightly, not out of discomfort, but attentiveness. "You will be taught how to issue commands," Malik continued, "how to detain, how to pursue. But I want you to learn something harder, how to see, how to pause, how to recognize that every person you engage has a life, a family, a name, and rights you are sworn to protect, not override." The weight of his words hung in the misty air. You may never pull over a judge, you may never be filmed, but the moment you think your uniform is a shield from scrutiny, that is the moment you've stepped out of service and into harm. He paused, then said quietly, "Don't be afraid to lead by restraint." It was not a rousing speech, there was no dramatic crescendo, but when he finished, the cadets stood straighter, not in robotic obedience, but in understanding. He had spoken not like a politician, not like a lecturer, but like someone who'd lived the consequences of their silence. And more importantly, who had forgiven it, but not forgotten it. After the address, the academy director shook Malik's hand. A few cadets approached with respectful nods. One of them, black, maybe 21, whispered, "Thank you for showing us the right way." Malik nodded, placed a hand on the young man's shoulder, and replied, "Go serve with honor." Later that afternoon, a quiet ceremony was held inside the academy auditorium. 34 cadets graduated. They were the first officers to enter Ohio law enforcement under the Hayes Integrity Act. Their certification bore a new line printed beneath the state seal, "Trained in dignity, bound by law." By the time Malik left the academy grounds, the fog had lifted. The flag overhead flapped cleanly in the breeze. He paused at the steps, watching as family members hugged new officers, as mothers wiped proud tears, as children looked up at their parents with awe and curiosity. It would take time. Nothing fixed overnight. Laws could pass, training could shift. But culture was stubborn. Still, something had begun. Something that didn't start with a protest, or a speech, or a verdict, but with a camera, a refusal, and a man who had spent his life believing that the law could be made to serve, not simply to punish. That belief had been tested on a roadside. And now it was being rebuilt, one cadet, one class, one choice at a time. 3 months passed like the slow shifting of tectonic plates, quiet on the surface, but deep underneath. The shape of things had changed. What began with a single wrongful arrest in a sunlit parking lot had, through clarity and composure, evolved into a new doctrine of justice for the state of Ohio. The Hayes Integrity Act was no longer just a policy. It had become a lived experience, felt most keenly at the State Law Enforcement Training Academy, where the first class of cadets trained under the reformed standards was about to graduate. The air was crisp that morning, the kind that hinted at summer's edge but carried spring's echo. Flags fluttered gently over the academy courtyard, and chairs had been arranged in perfect rows facing a small podium backed by the state seal. Families had gathered early, proud mothers in pressed blouses, fathers in borrowed suits, siblings holding up homemade signs. The energy was warm, celebratory, but laced with a deeper current of expectation. This wasn't just any graduation, it was the graduation. At precisely 10 a.m., the cadets marched in, 52 of them, each in uniform, each trained not just in tactics, but in humility, accountability, and restraint. They had spent months immersed in a curriculum shaped by one man's quiet refusal to accept a broken standard. And now, that man stood once again at the edge of ceremony, not to be honored, not to be praised, but to bear witness. Justice Malik Hayes wore no robe today, just a deep navy suit, understated tie, and that same calm stillness that had once filled a courtroom, a gas station lot, a viral video, and eventually a state's conscience. He stood at the side of the podium, his hands folded in front of him, as the academy director offered opening remarks. "We are not just celebrating the accomplishments of these cadets," the director said, voice steady. "We are acknowledging a shift in culture, a new expectation, a higher standard, and the man who helped bring that standard to life is standing among us." A pause. Then, with a gesture of quiet reverence, he turned to Malik. "I ask the Honorable Justice Hayes to say a few words." Malik stepped forward, not with pomp or ceremony, but with gravity. He took the podium, rested his hands on either side, and let the silence speak for a breath before beginning. "When I stood here 3 months ago, many of you were still students, uncertain, nervous, searching," he said. "Now you stand not just as officers, but as stewards, not of power, but of principle." He looked out over the cadets, the families, the quiet faces waiting to hear something more than just protocol. "You've been taught how to enforce the law. But remember this: justice is not something you hold over people. It's something you carry beside them." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. In a moment of silence, a person's dignity can be taken. In a moment of clarity, it can be restored. Every interaction you have, from a sidewalk conversation to a traffic stop, contains that choice. Will you enforce with assumption, or will you protect with understanding? A few heads nodded. One cadet blinked quickly, hiding emotion behind discipline. Malik ended simply. "You are the first class under a new standard. Make sure you are not the last." He stepped back. No applause, just a respectful silence broken only by the sound of wind through the flags above. After the final names were called, after the certificates were handed out and salutes exchanged, the courtyard began to disperse into small celebrations, hugs, photographs, quiet tears. Families gathered around their newly minted officers. There was pride, relief, hope. As Malik turned to leave the stage, a young man in uniform approached. He was maybe 23, with brown skin and a proud posture that barely concealed his nerves. His badge was still stiff with newness. "Sir," he said, stopping Malik mid-step. "My name's Luis Andrade. My parents came here from Honduras. I'm the first in my family to finish college, first to wear a uniform." Malik smiled gently. "It's good to meet you, Officer Andrade." Luis hesitated, then said, voice soft but firm, "I want to thank you for what you did, for how you stood. You made justice feel human again." Malik's face softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through the years of practiced composure. He extended a hand, not as a judge to a subordinate, but as a man to another man, carrying something heavy and hopeful at the same time. Luis shook it, straight and proud. "You have a hard job ahead," Malik said, "but if you remember that justice isn't a badge, it's a behavior, you'll do more good than you can imagine." Luis nodded, eyes steady. "I will, sir." As the crowd thinned and the graduates returned to their families, Malik stepped off the platform and walked toward the long stone path leading out of the academy grounds. He didn't glance back. He didn't linger for more conversations, more cameras. He had said what needed to be said. And this time, he left not as a man undone by the injustice of a moment, but as the architect of a better way forward. The same road that once held a flashing cruiser behind his BMW had now given way to something far more powerful, a future. One where silence didn't mean erasure, where restraint wasn't weakness, and where law enforcement was redefined not by fear, but by fairness. And somewhere behind him, a young recruit told his mother, "That's the man who changed everything." And she, wiping her eyes, whispered back, "Not by shouting, but by standing still." Malik walked on, steady, unshaken, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew that real change doesn't come loud. It comes right. One policy, one class, one officer at a time. And in that moment, the story that had begun with suspicion, unfolded with shame and swelled into national reckoning, ended with something far more lasting: dignity redefined. In a world where injustice often hides in plain sight, the story of Justice Malik Hayes reminds us that silence can be powerful, and that dignity, once stripped, can be reclaimed through clarity, courage, and the law itself. What began as a routine stop turned into a moment of national reflection, not because of a loud protest or dramatic confrontation, but because one man refused to surrender his integrity. As citizens, we must ask ourselves, how many others have been cuffed without cameras watching? How many names never make it to headlines because they don't wear robes or carry titles? Malik's story isn't an isolated event. It's a mirror. And it reflects a truth we must all confront: that justice cannot live in slogans alone. It must live in systems, policies, and the everyday decisions of those we empower. From the governor's signature on the Hayes Integrity Act, to the 52 recruits trained under new standards, to the quiet words of a young Latino officer who said, "You made justice feel human again." This story proves that real change happens one person at a time. But it also demands something of you. As an American citizen, your role is not passive, it's active. You hold the power to question, to vote, to watch, to record, to speak, and to expect more. From your officers, your lawmakers, your judges, and your neighbors. When dignity is denied, it's our collective responsibility to restore it. If this story moved you, if it made you think, question, or hope, don't let it end here. Like this video. Share it with someone who still believes the system can be better. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next true story that challenges comfort and demands courage. We don't just tell stories, we illuminate truths, one moment, one voice, one step at a time. Because sometimes the strongest stand isn't a raised fist. It's a man in cuffs who refuses to bow his head. Let this be more than a video. Let it be a reminder that justice begins with how we treat each other, especially when no one's watching. Stand for something, speak for someone, and make sure your silence is never the reason someone else loses their rights. Change is possible, but it starts with you, right now.